What terrifying confession has someone told you while drunk? I have two. I had a housemate in college who several years prior had accidentally shot and killed a friend of his in a hunting accident. He went to trial and was acquitted of all charges. Years later, he didn't tell me, but he told a woman I was intimate with that it wasn't an accident. Years ago, when I worked at the Las Vegas Hilton, in the main kitchen I had a very high-strung boss named Hazing. He was from Turkey. We jokingly referred to him as insane because of his personality. Once, after our shift was over, he grabbed a case of beer from the supply walk-in refrigerator and invited a few of us to help ourselves. He probably had 4 or 5 himself. He then proceeded to tell us that when he lived in Turkey, he had kicked some guy's ass and came to the US to get away. My co-workers and I really didn't give it too much thought. About a month later, we came to find out that, while on vacation in Mexico, Hussein had been walking back to his hotel room after drinking at a bar. He had ducked down an alley to take a piss and was caught by a policeman. He was charged and convicted of public urination. At least at the time, the US didn't have reciprocity with Turkey, but Mexico did. Well, it turns out that what Hussein had described as kicking someone's ass turned out to be murder. He was taken back to Turkey, where we assume that he spent the rest of his life in a Turkish prison. The movie The Midnight Express portrays what life is like there. A co-worker told me she went all angel of mercy and smothered her elderly, dementia-ridden grandmother while she was sleeping. The next Monday in the office was definitely a weird one after that particular happy hour confession. I worked in a hospital and an alcoholic guy I knew from around my town came in. Of course he was very drunk, so he got a bed. He was homeless at this point. Just as he was starting to settle, he screamed, I slit his freaking throat. So I went up to him and asked him to settle, and he started telling me that he did it while in the army and could never forgive himself for it. Cried himself to sleep and died in the local park a few months later. It was me who did the confessing. When I was 18, I was sexually assaulted on a bridge in the middle of the night when I was all alone. My mum works in hearing, and she had always told me to bite someone if I got into trouble. So I did. I bit into his neck until my teeth met again. He fell down, then I ran all the way home. A few weeks later I read in the news that a serial assaulter had gone to the hospital with neck wounds and later died. They'd drawn it down to him attacking someone and them acting in self-defense. I never told anyone until I got really drunk with my boyfriend last year and spilled it. He couldn't believe I'd kept that secret. Once at a college party, this big guy got upset, picked up the table, and threw it across the room, shouting, my uncle molested me. Everyone was terrified, but we all felt really bad for the guy. I have a friend whose grandmother married her late husband's friend. One day while drunk he confessed to killing her first husband. She packed up the kids and left. I had a male friend tell me he had raped me once when I was passed out drunk. I'm a straight male and had been friends with this guy for 15 years and had been drunk with him a lot. Since then I have found out a lot of messed up stuff about him. 6 months after my now and finally ex-husband had separated and gotten back together, he confessed to me that while we were separated, he had drugged and raped me. He had convinced me before the confession that I had only been really drunk and came on to him and confessed my love for him, and it was honestly the only reason we got back together. After the confession, I spent a year and a half suicidal because I couldn't convince myself to leave again. A couple of my friends intervened and convinced me to leave. He wasn't even drunk when he confessed. He was sober and was like, now that I've confessed, you can't be mad at me, because if I hadn't done it, we wouldn't be together now. It was a power trip for him and made me realize just how controlling and manipulative he had been during our entire marriage. It's really fricked up how people who profess to love you are sometimes the ones who hurt you worst. My sister's boyfriend at the time told me he thought he might have fallen for the wrong sister. Doesn't compare to most of these, but my sister is my best friend, and I was so scared he might ruin that. Edit. Since a lot of people have asked, no, I never told my sister about it. Another edit. They broke up very shortly after this because he was untrustworthy in other ways. He stole some money. She kicked him to the curb. I heard my mom tell her friend I was a mistake and the reason her and my dad divorced. That's why you don't eavesdrop. Had a buddy tell me his friend drunkenly confessed to him that he had killed his stepdad and made it look like a suicide. His stepdad had been abusive towards him and his mom for years, and it finally broke when he made it look like his stepfather had hung himself in their garage. I don't know who the friend was. I was never given a name or much else of the story. Went on a work do, and my co-worker, a major stone-faced bland woman, got pretty drunk. Ended up telling me she discovered her dad's body when he hung himself. Needless to say, I realized why she was the way she was after that. Haha, I put Adderall in your beer. We're gonna party till the sun comes up, bro.
N.
My mom was in another state for business. A company flew her crew out to Texas to discuss a change in software and offered their company, and so it was just my dad taking care of me. I was about 10 and he came to tuck me in one night, but he has incredibly hammered. He opened the door to my bedroom, told me I was a mistake that saved them from getting divorced, and good night. Worst part is he didn't close the door completely when he left. When I was 14, my mom took me and my sisters and a couple of our friends to the beach. My sister 15 and I got our own room with our 2 friends and wound up meeting some boys and getting drunk. My sister's friend 15F was really drunk and got super upset and confessed that her stepfather had been sexually molesting her, raping her for years. Really horrible stuff. It sobered everyone up fast. We rallied around her, told her we were there for her, yada yada, but when we got home from the beach trip a few days later, I knew I needed to tell my mom. After I told my mom, she got the state police involved. There was a trial, and the man wound up sentenced to 8 years in prison. It turned out he was doing it to the younger sister as well. My best friend disappeared for a while, presumably left town. We were both in our mid-20s. He came back after a month or so, and he'd take me out every night drinking and partying. I wondered how he was able to blow so much money on drugs and alcohol, but he wouldn't tell me. I saw him pay our tab one night and he must have had 12 or 15 grand on him. After coming back to town, he basically stayed inebriated at all times and wanted to hang out with me whenever he could. He'd come over to my place after closing the bars down, and we'd often keep partying until morning. He would usually end up breaking down and crying to me about how he can't live with himself over what he did. He wouldn't give details. Night after night this would happen, until he broke down again one night and told me he was paid a lot of money to do some bad things to bad people. He confessed that he was paid by someone in his dad's gang to burn someone's business down over a money dispute. Then he told me he killed a couple of guys who were thought to be molesting children. He said he was given a handgun and a shotgun and was paid $10,000 after each man was executed. More than 10 years later, I still don't know if I believe him or not. After he came back, he was so fricked up and depressed. If he was telling the truth, it would make sense. He kept doing drugs and drinking until about 5 years ago, when he had a heart attack at age 27. He quit using drugs and alcohol, but the damage was done. He suffered another heart attack 6 months later and died a few days after his 28th birthday. He was the funniest and kindest person that I've known, and I miss him. A funny old drunk in my town used to come in and chat with me at the ice cream parlor I worked at. He was a very kind old man who liked to joke around, and he was always very appropriate to me and the other teens who worked there. Just lonely, I guess. One day I was asking him if he was ever married, and he got tears in his eyes and said, "I lost her. She died with the baby." And that's when everything went bad. And then left. Me and the other girl working just sobbed. It was so sad. After a work party, the wife of a colleague and me ended up being the last 2 people standing. We were both fairly drunk when she started telling me about how she was raped by a priest when she was a kid. The church covered it all up, and the bastard never faced any charges. When he was 11, my dad was abducted and raped by 3M. He was so terrified that he never told his parents. After my grandpa passed away, my dad finally told my grandma what happened. She told him that they already knew. One of my dad's siblings knew and had told grandpa. She just said that he had taken care of it. A few years later, a developer bought my grandparents' farm and turned it into a development. During excavation they found 3 male skeletons buried in a single grave. I guess grandpa really did take care of it. Rangers really do lead the way. One of my best friends since middle school opened up to me the day we had our last day of high school. We had been partying all day, got off at 10 AM, but most people left at around 3 PM to go get ready for the seniors dinner and after party and whatnot. My friend stayed behind with our class president. I told him I'd pick him up for the dinner and left. When I got back, both were falling down drunk and in tears. A few years earlier, our class priest had lost his father. I take my buddy back to his house so he can get changed for the dinner, and on the way he tells me what happened. They had kept drinking when everyone left and eventually got to the topic of their dads. I had never met my friend's dad. He died and that was all I knew. I never knew how he died. It turns out my buddy's dad was a lawyer or something in the country he's from and was being extorted by a gang. When money started to run out, my buddy's dad sent the family to another country and told them he'd meet them there, that he had to finish some things up. A few weeks after moving they learned that he had been murdered by the gang. It completely fricked my friend up. We always used to drink heavily and whatever since we were in high school. For me it was just drinking. For my buddy it was numbing the pain. It was freaking shocking when he told me this and really made me understand him a lot more, why he acted how he acted. My cousin and I found out we were molested by the same uncle. A guy in a pub told me through tears that 2 guys took him at knife point and bound to a warehouse in the middle of nowhere, raped, harmed and kept him captive for days. He got free whilst they were sleeping, stabbed them both to death, and left them there. Whether he was actually telling the truth or not I will never know. He seemed very deeply traumatized by the experience and seemed to if nothing else believe what he was telling me. It was in the days when I didn't have internet access, so I wasn't able to look for clues about it. What's terrifying is the amount of men I've dated or been friends with who have disclosed horrific childhood sexual abuse to me while they were very drunk. I had someone tell me that he molested his daughter when she was an infant because he was angry and thought that his girlfriend had cheated on him and that she wasn't his biological daughter. He went on to say DNA testing was done and it was determined that she was actually his daughter and that he felt very guilty about the whole thing. His daughter was 7 to 8 at the time he told me this. I literally spent a night tossing and turning thinking about it and finally decided I had to report him. My friend's husband told me he was hiding liquor from his wife my friend, which was weird because they both drink and it's not a big deal. I told my friend what he said, she confronted him and all of his lies started pouring out. Cheating on her with multiple women, lying about his income, taking CCs out in her name, racking up tens of thousands of dollars on them, stealing from their kids' college funds. They are now divorced. That weird little lie he told me while drunk is what started it all. I had a boyfriend who never talked about his past ever. He talked so fondly of his old state, but just about the actual state, never about people. If you treat a prod further he would just say oh well it doesn't matter anymore. We were young, I was about 19 and he was probably like 23 or so. He drank a shoot ton all the time and whatever, we were young, so I just thought that it was normal and all in good fun. One night while shoot-faced he started talking about how much he loved going into the woods and how he and his friends enjoyed playing on the rivers and streams in his old state. Then he got very sad and started to babble a bit incoherently. I heard him say something along the lines of his friend came to his house on meth and they were all also on drugs. Then more incoherently babbled, then something about his friend getting shot in the face. Then more incoherent babbling, then something about that is why he can never go home again. He was so desperately sad and missed his home very much. You could tell every time the topic came up. So yeah, I'm pretty sure he accidentally or on purpose killed a guy and was on the run. I have my money on accident because he seemed so distraught. Boo, you never know. Also, you barely know anyone or anything at 19 years old. I often wonder if he ever had to face those demons. My old pastor told me he was gay and found women repulsive. He had a wife and a baby on the way. This was in a small, very religious town where fear about the homosexuals were rampant. My mother's first husband, the sperm donor. I was 16. She had just walked out that same day, and he got extremely drunk and told me that I was never supposed to have been born and that I should have died with my brother. I asked him what he meant by my brother, since I had no siblings, and he confessed to beating the shit out of my mother when she was pregnant and she ended up in the hospital. I was born, but my twin brother died in the womb. At the time my mother's Polish was not good, so he claimed to doctors that she just fell down the stairs and threatened to have her deported and used me as blackmail if she ever told anyone. I followed her soon after. Once she had contacted me that she'd found a place to stay, I asked her if she had anything to tell me regarding my birth, and she told me the same story. I guess that explains why I felt like I was missing a part of myself all my life. This will most likely get lost, but here it goes. When I moved to the current city I live in, I found a roommate on Craigslist. It was 2011, so not as weird as it would be today, and he was really cool. He lived in a double master house, so I had a lot of privacy. He was a young real estate agent, and we ended up hanging out in each other's social circles. Well, we'll call him M. Ended up catching feelings for this girl that became pretty close to me. When the feelings weren't reciprocated, he started getting weird and almost resentful towards me, but I digress. Over time I found out that M had a drinking problem. I would get home from work around 1 AM, and it wasn't uncommon he would be passed out on the couch after finishing off one of those cheap ass liter bottles of wine. One night I'd get home a little early, and I notice him sitting with his back against the couch in the total dark. I ask him if he's okay, in which I can immediately tell he's emotionally distressed. With the drunk wine next to him, he begins telling me that when he first moved to the city he caught his girlfriend in bed with another guy and shot and killed him. His girlfriend fled the state, and because it was in a shifty part of town, police never paid it much attention, so he got away with it, and he thinks about it all the time. I gracefully made my exit upstairs, freaking TF out. When I saw him the next morning, he asked me what time I got home from work, because he didn't hear me come in, meaning he has no recollection of telling me he murdered someone. I had my dad help move me out the next week and I never mentioned it to him. One day, my dad went to a bar by himself, got shoot-faced, and tried to ride his motorcycle home. He crashed it into our neighbor's mailbox, freaking up both the bike and his knee. As I was treating his wound, he confessed about how he had been cheating on my mom with a coworker over the last few months, and he was drinking out of depression because the coworker quit her job and ghosted him after she got him to spend thousands on buying her expensive gifts. He then cried his eyes out, and this was my first time ever seeing him shed a single tear in my life. I was only like 16 to 17 at the time. It was a lot to take in. My grandfather grew up in the sticks of Texas. One time he casually brought up that I shouldn't ever wear pants with cotton lining them. Apparently his best friend burned alive in front of him because his pants caught fire and they couldn't get it out or the pants off in time. Never mentioned anything about it before or after. A friend of mine told me once we were out of college about his hazing back in freshman year of high school for wrestling. That was some repressed barbaric homosexual stuff. He started tearing up. It was bad. You hear about some of this hazing stuff, but there's plenty of times you don't hear about it, and it goes unreported. An ex-friend, not because of this, but other circumstances, basically suggested he had sex with his uncle just to piss off his aunt mom's sister, and that he was saving it for when they had a big fight. Later he denied saying anything like that, of course, but a while later we heard there was indeed problems within his family and they ended up moving from town. That was when I was like 16 to 17 yo. Guy I worked with was hanging out with me and my friends. My friends left, and I was alone with coworker. He didn't seem that drunk, but later claimed he was. He told me all about the fantasies he had about raping and torturing me. Yup, I left pretty promptly. My mother once told me a story while drunk. She had a pregnancy before me, but her boyfriend wasn't ready for a kid, so he kicked her in the stomach until she was no longer pregnant. So for revenge she had her friend, who was a prostitute, seduce him, take him to a hotel room, and tied him up. My mom then described how she took a baseball bat and broke every bone she could of his. Described how she had to throw water on him to keep him awake. She was never tried for it, so I'm assuming he lived. I had heard the kicked in the stomach till miscarriage part before. The whole bat thing was a new detail. She hasn't mentioned it since. My awesome boss at the time, who didn't say much about his life, confessed to me that his marriage wasn't something he wanted and that has only staying in it for the love of his 2 young daughters. It was heartbreaking. My friend told me drunk that when she was 8 years old, her dad would take her to his hunting lodge and sell her to his hunting friends. This included using a broom on her when she was 12. She didn't think there was anything wrong with what her dad did. Honestly, I cried and was horrified. The one time I didn't know what to say. In college, I was getting drunk with a couple friends. One admitted that she gave her brother a blowjob. Her brother had caught her watching lesbian pronoun and threatened to tell their parents if she didn't suck his dick. My other friend and I were horrified and asked her why she didn't just tell her parents first about her brother blackmailing her and that the claim she was watching lesbian pronoun was a lie. She paused for a secretary and said she didn't think of that. A guy I knew admitted to being the passenger of a vehicle that hit a girl he went to high school with at like 50 kilometers over the speed limit he guessed around 115 km/h. It was midnight, she was out cold but still breathing, and they fled the scene because the driver had been drinking. He said that she survived but no one ever found out who was in the car. He seemed to really be grappling with that. Walked in on one roommate telling another roommate he was molested as a kid and slowly backed out and left. Not BC, I don't care, just it wasn't his intention to tell me that, and I felt bad.